Welcome back to another episode of the Commander Experience podcast. In today's episode, we are looking at the different Commander archetypes you expect to see in Bracket 4 and how the meta might be shaping the way we are building and playing those decks.
We'll break down the main archetypes and see which one actually show up in our bracket and on the tables in general in our pods. So let's get into it. Okay, so let's start out with talking about some of the main archetypes we see. So I've tried to break it out into three, and then there's probably a lot of other ones that people want to mention, but I will say that most of them kind of fits into these three ones. So the first one I'll talk about is what I would call control/stacks, let's call it that. And the main plan here is basically to slow down your opponents. Most of the time your deck is maybe a bit slower than the other decks, but maybe it has a more, intricate win con that is harder to interact with, but a bit slower, and then you use stacks or control to kind of stop the other people from winning before that deck. Could also be some commanders that are just slower, that wants to go down this road to try to catch up in that way. And the next one up is Turbo, or a combo, whatever you want to call it. And I would say this includes aggro, if aggro was a thing in Commander, but I would say basically combo is what aggro is for Commander. So that's combo. And yeah, here we're just trying to go as fast as possible, get through the finish line before everyone else even gets to establish any kind of board. And next up, and that this is where the one we want to talk about the most, is midrange. So midrange is basically that you want to outvalue your opponents. You're not trying to win first, you're not necessarily trying to stopping your opponent, you're just trying to generate so much value that your opponent just can't get through. So it's kind of a mix of the other two decks, because a lot of mid-range decks can also win fast, and they can also do some controlling stuff. But the main plan is just to set up a board that is unbeatable. That's the three categories.
And if we should just begin to talk a little bit about it, just to compare real quick, what do you see as the main differences between Bracket 4 and cEDH?
For me, when I look into it, I think that mid-range is maybe even more a thing in Bracket 4, because there is still some of the social contract in some ways in Bracket 4, even though it's anything goes. But there still is some kind of limits, because you kind of don't want to just build a straight up cEDH deck in that format. So you're maybe shying away from hard locks or maybe winning on turn 2, because is it really a Bracket 4 deck? And that kind of excludes playing a real turbo deck or a real stacks deck that actually just locks the board down. I think that's maybe the biggest difference. I'm not sure if it necessarily needs to be that way, because since we're playing Bracket 4, the decks are also a bit slower, so maybe there is some more time for those kind of decks to set in. Yeah. What win cons is probably the biggest difference in all three of the categories. How they win is a bit slower.
But I also remember you talking about a bit earlier that you kind of seeing in cEDH that it is kind of a mid-range hell, or whatever you want to call it, where it's all surrounded about Ristic Study. And a card we've mentioned on the channel is Steel Enchantment, which has also found its way into cEDH for the very same reason.
It's kind of interesting that I feel like we have played in Bracket 4 and played not necessarily big mana, but big mana is one of the things that is mid-range. And I feel like some of the deck archetypes we are playing is actually beginning to pop up in cEDH, and they are also moving more and more toward mid-range. Where I feel before, if we see by like 5 years or something, cEDH was a lot of, now stacks is good, and then people went to mid-range to stop the stacks. Then the stacks just kind of died, and now mid-range was everything, and then people went to turbo, because they could win before the mid-range got their engine in play, and there was like this natural cycle, and I kind of feel like it had disappeared a bit for cEDH. Let's see, maybe it comes back, but currently they seem to be stuck in mid-range hell.
I know you follow the cEDH scene just a little bit, because you're also a former cEDH player yourself. So when you look into the tournaments and decks that are winning the tournaments and decks that are participating in general, if you had to put a number on it, in what percentages do you see is covering the scene, so to say? Do you say it's 50-50 between mid-range and turbo, or what do you think?
Like a rough estimate, I'll probably say 80, 15, 5, and 80 is mid-range currently.
And the 15 is turbo?
Yeah.
Okay. And what is the 5 control stacks?
And they control stacksy decks.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And I think that's also one of the big problems is stacks is better when there's another stacked deck, so it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where more stacked decks breeds more stacked decks, but if there's a low amount, it's kind of worse to play stacks, so it's weird like that.
I think it's also a question of there's not enough real good stacks pieces.
Yeah, true.
There's some that are just very good, and then there's a lot that is just okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, let's get back to what interests us the most, and that is Bracket 4, of course, where we are playing. Do you see the same issue creeping in on Bracket 4 that mid-range is kind of the way to go? Or is that just what we are seeing at our table? Or do you think it's the way to go if you want to build a viable Bracket 4 deck that can compete?
I think that it seems like mid-range is just taking over and getting stronger and stronger, and I'm not real sure why. I don't necessarily think they have printed a lot of mid-range stables recently. Of course, there's been some like Smothering Tide, but that isn't really recently at this point. So yeah, I'm not really sure. Maybe I think maybe because in our pod at least, and maybe it's also that with Bracket 4 that I think our win cons are getting better. And they are getting closer to cEDH, and as we are moving closer in that direction, because I think that's kind of inevitable. If you are in a bracket, you are slowly moving towards the bracket above you and getting closer and closer and closer. And as we are getting closer, I think we're also getting closer to being, if you want to call it mid-range hell, that's the question, if it's even hell. But we're also kind of stuck in the same place because for some reason it seems like since our win cons is getting better, mid-range is also getting better at the same time.
Yeah, and I also think that the way that you have always compared your deck to is it cEDH or not is looking at what cards are they playing in cEDH, what kind of cards are they putting in their deck. And if they even begin to put cards in their deck that we are already running in Bracket 4, now we can ask ourselves the question, are we playing cEDH now? Because we've always played cards like Steel Enchantment. But do you think it's also something to do with Wizards printing a lot of mid-range commanders? Because you build Glab, for instance, you build Bellow, I have built Helga, and I do think a lot of those commanders are sort of leaning into a mid-range strategy and not a combo per se.
Could be, that the commanders are more mid-range. That's where we're going. I think, maybe that's the reasoning here. I am a bit confused what it does specifically, because I think most of our commanders are still kind of old commanders, and we're still moving toward mid-range. As you said, we have some. But it is curious, like, I wish I could see another pod that played Bracket 4, or two other pods that played Bracket 4, and see how their games are going, if it's vastly different to us. I think one of the things where I really saw that maybe mid-range hell is where we are at is that both I and a guy called Christian on pod tried to build a turbo thing, Rector's the Muscle and Rector the other Rectors, but both those decks is kind of trying to win as soon as possible, so fast as possible, and both of them are not really getting there because it seems like the mid-range decks are actually just as fast at winning. But they also just play Mystic Study and Smothering Tide and whatever engine that just is unstoppable.
What about my deck, the Torsten deck with the Heir Apparents? Do you see that as a turbo deck or do you see that as closer to a mid-range deck?
I think actually that would probably put it in the turbo deck category. Because you're not really... it's a bit of a weird one because Torsten is kind of the value engine and he's the one that does the Mystic Study thing.
But he can't do it as early as turn 3.
Yeah. I'll probably put it in turbo deck, yeah. It is a turbo deck.
I played him yesterday, and I was lucky enough to win with it in one of the games. But I won in a way that I hadn't won before. I won through the Halo Fountain.
Yeah.
And in that game particularly, it felt like a mid-range deck because I was grinding it out. I was in top deck mode, and I had all three of you against me. So when you're in that situation, it always drags out a bit and doesn't feel very, very turbo-y. But I do think myself that I would consider that of my decks that are the closest to a turbo deck.
And I think that's also maybe a good, pointer towards why mid-range is doing so well, because if a game is ending up in like that where Torsten even has to grind a bit, the mid-range deck is just going to outgrind a Torsten deck 9 out of 10 times. So yeah, it is interesting. I would say that for me, when I think about it, at least, I think that Bracket 4 is even more locked into mid-range than cEDH is. I think cEDH has a chance to get some cards that enables turbo again, that stops midrange a bit. I don't know, a mana crypt of some sort that does something like mana crypt, but not a direct mana crypt. Some more fast mana, something like that goes under the midrange decks. But I think that Break It 4 is in this weird spot with win cons where, because you're playing so close to cEDH, you don't want to play the most optimal win cons there is. And because you're not playing the most optimal win cons there is always, you have a hard time winning before the mid-range decks. So it's kind of self-fulfilling prophecy that you're stuck in mid-range. I will say, now we are talking a lot about turbo and mid-range, I will say though that there is more and more control-y decks in our pod. I'm not sure how good they're doing, but there is more of them. But yeah, most of them are like control decks, but they are very close to being mid-range because, of course, if you're playing control, you're playing blue. And if you're playing blue, you're probably tutoring for Ristic Study and stuff like that. So it's arguable if it even is a control deck. But yeah, I think we're seeing more control, and I'm not sure it's doing so well because it seems like our answer to that is people just turning up the knob of value and say, okay, I just need to create even more mana or create even more card draw. So yeah.
Do you also think that it goes with the territory, and that is certainly also the case in cEDH, that, or if I feel that's the case in cEDH, I don't know because I'm not playing it, but trying to win first is always going to be the issue, because in cEDH and also in Bracket 4, I think it's safe to say that if you're trying to combo win first, that you have a tendency to already know in advance that this is going to be hard. The whole table is probably going to stop me. So I think if you have that in mind, that most players will kind of lean back and say, maybe I just set up some value and try to find my spot to try and win in. And that's usually when the first couple of interaction pieces has been used, that you feel a bit safer, because having one counterspell in hand to protect your win con is usually not going to be enough.
Yeah, I haven't actually thought about that, but I think you're right, yeah, that we see it a lot in our part. I think it's a general thing in Break It 4. I would be surprised if it wasn't that. Basically, if you try to win first, you're probably getting stopped, and the person after you, if they are ready to win, they'll win because all the interaction has been used. And on top of all the interaction being used, the next person in line maybe even have priority bullet the two other people, so they haven't used their interaction. So now the next person in line has their interaction still, and people use the interaction on the winning player. So now they have interaction and the other interaction has been used, and yeah, I think so, yeah. That's probably one of the big reasons why mid-range is so good, that you kind of need to go over the top if you want to win at this point. And you kind of don't want to be the first one going, unless you have like Silence or Grand Arbiter or 3 counterspells in hand.
Before we are moving on to our next segment, let's do Card of the Episode, a little segment in our podcast where we take a look of random cards that are on our minds that maybe fit into a new strategy, a new commander, whatever you have. And for this episode, Jacob, you have chosen the card Generous Patron because you're looking at that card for a deck at this very moment. So why do you think this card is interesting?
Yeah, I'll just go through what it does. It's a dude that's a 1/4. Not so irrelevant actually. But basically, when he enters, it has support 2, so you can put 2 counters on, or 1/1 counter on up to 2 creatures. And if you do it on your opponent's creatures, you draw a card for each one you do. So it's a 3-mana guy that has an ETB that draws you 2 cards if you give your opponent counters. So that seems pretty good for an ETB effect. So it's easily abusable with the blink stuff. So that's why I'm also looking into it. But the real spicy stuff is also that it's very scalable, because one generous patron sees another generous patron. So if you clone it, you would suddenly draw 4 cards. And I think the other side is, and that's something I'm looking into at least a lot currently, is there's being printed a lot of good +1/+1 counter cards. I think we're not gonna wait for many new sets until there is an actual cEDH/Bracket 4 deck that actually is a +1/+1 counter deck that can really abuse stuff like this and go infinite with stuff, give stuff infinite counters, and you draw your whole deck with this guy, and yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say that you could already consider Galadriel Bracket 4-ish. I had a deck earlier when Nado was legal, where I ran Nado as a secret commander in that deck. But even without Nado, I do think that with clones and stuff like that Galadriel could work.
I got it a bit of a mind as well, because I have recently built a deck where Kenrith is the commander, and Kenrith suddenly has a 2-mana ability that draws card if this guy is in play, so he's also kind of there. So yeah, I think he has a lot of cool interactions, and he's a 1/4, so not that easy to remove.
And we're already in bracket 4 playing clones in general.
Yeah.
We're just putting them in our decks because in bracket 4, everyone is playing powerful creatures. So Phantasmal Image and Flesh Duplicate cards like that, they are seeing play just in general in many of our decks.
And I think he's pretty wide. You can also put him into decks that want to reanimate stuff. Reanimating a guy drawing 2 cards seems pretty decent as well. So yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to you playing it across the table, seeing what it can do. I know you love your clone decks.
I do.
Anyway, let's move on to our next segment, which is a bit surrounded about what we see specific in our games. Is it the case that mid-range are reigning supreme, or do we see other archetypes? And I think a nice place to start is to look at our statistics. We are running statistics in our groups, writing down every game, who wins, which commander wins, etc. And we also have a top 10 list of our commanders for the given year. So the top 10 list for 2025, when I'm looking at that list, the only deck I can see really being a turbo deck is maybe Vivi. All the rest would go into either turbo combo or mid-range, I think. And like we just talked about, whether or not you're putting Torsten in the turbo or the mid-range, he's kind of the only one that is close to being in the turbo category. Besides Vivi, that is.
Yeah, so if we look at our stats, it seems like mid-range is the way to go, at least for now. And also, that's also the feeling I have from playing in our pod. It seems like leaning more into that is good.
But if we can conclude that bracket 4 is like cEDH stuck in mid-range hell, is it then that? Is it a hell, or do you think it's a nice place to be? Do you think Magic feels great at mid-range? Do you think there needs to be more variety, or is it fine as it is?
I will say that if I had to be stuck in one of the archetypes, I think mid-range is the most fun. You get to play a lot of Magic cards. You get to play a lot of draw a lot of cards, get a lot of mana, do a lot of stuff. So it is, at least from my viewpoint, it's the best place to be stuck if you want to be stuck anywhere. I could wish for, I don't think turbo necessarily, but I wish aggro was a thing, so that some of the more dirty decks got punished on their life totals, and life totals actually mattered. And that's actually not because of mid-range specifically or something like that, but just I would like there would be more angles that your decks has to handle, so you're not just looking into stopping combos, but you're also actually looking into, okay, I actually need to watch my life. Maybe I need to actually have some blockers on the board. I think it's actually getting more relevant, not because aggro is getting better, but because people are just losing life more on different effects. Could also be that people play professional facebreaker and actually hit people in the face. There is more of these cards where people lose life.
Yeah, and I would just like to say, just real quickly, that there's been a lot of talk of the One Ring, how powerful it is, and if it's good for Magic. But one of the things I've noticed is that it's actually almost in every game people play the One Ring in our part, it's almost always equal to that person being critical on his life total, because people are pressuring him. Yeah. It's almost kind of an arch enemy card, because people know this card is going to cost him life, let's attack him. So I do think that the One Ring, besides of it being powerful, has brought some play that we didn't see before regarding life total. I think I really like that card because it's not all good. Yeah, like Ristic Study. There is a downside.
It sounds kind of outrageous, but it's kind of a more fair version of Ristic Study, even though the card is insane. Yeah, because there's actually other angles to the cards. You're not just getting free value.
Yeah, and we know, like in your Derevi deck, that is centered around finding the One Ring and exploit that by untapping it and tapping it and draw a million cards. We know from the very get-go that if you're going to attack and you just need to get an attack in, then we are hitting you, because why not pressure your life total? Yeah. So, but I do agree regarding the mid-range. I also think that with mid-range comes the territory of what Magic players like to do, and that's taking a lot of game actions. Yeah. There's a lot of triggering your commander that triggers this one, and you draw a card and you put a counter on, and there's a lot of this solitaire / gold fishing effect to the mid-range, I think.
Yeah, I think it's if you could say that, it's kind of high powers version of Battle Cruiser. That a lot of stuff is actually happening in the game and a lot of triggers and interaction, and so yeah, I would say that I'm not sure if let's say Turbo were the best in that everyone needs to play Turbo. I wouldn't have a lot of fun with that kind of meta. So I'm definitely more interested in what we're doing now. That's probably it. I think Stacks is also fun, but I think that's more of a me thing, maybe not more broad.
I think I was thinking about when we were talking earlier about if the commanders were the reason or not, if we are seeing a lot of mid-range at the moment. I do think that Wizards for many years have had a tendency to print very narrow-minded commanders. They're kind of doing one thing and you build your deck around that. Glarb is able to cast spells off the top of his library, etc. Where when I began playing Magic and I chose Muldrotha for my first commander, it was very open-ended. You could do a lot of things with Muldrotha and build it in so many ways. And I do think that Wizards intentionally have moved away from that. But that also means that you don't have it's not possible for players anymore to say, hey, let's build Glab, but do it as a turbo, because it doesn't make sense. Yeah. So when you are going away from the open-ended commanders, you're also kind of saying that this is the strategy, take it or leave it.
That is true, and I think Wizard is interested in having mid-range being the most common thing, because at least in lower brackets and more casual, you want to have battle cruisers, lots of stuff happening, and that is kind of what mid-range is. So I think a lot of the commanders are printed as mid-range shells, because that's what people find the most fun in bracket 2 and 3. So it makes a lot of sense, actually, if you put it like that, what Wizards kind of controlling what is being played. And also the bans, like Fast Mana got removed. Of course, that helped mid-range as well, but aggro decks lost a lot on that front. So,
and I do agree that while I like the place where our part is in, I think we had a lot of fun games. I think all the games we had yesterday was overall fun games where most of the players were participating in the game. I do also feel that it would be a breath of fresh air if we had a little more archetypes involved in the meta. But I do think that we need to see more, not only just more commanders that are supporting it, but also more creatures in general. We have a creature like Kedis that when you deal damage to an opponent, you deal that much damage to all opponents. And I do think we need more cards that's supporting that sort of strategy in order for aggro to be a real thing.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what they could do, but lightning bolts that hits every enemy in the face. I don't know. Stuff that scales with multiple players. So burn and aggro is actually a thing.
Yeah, I actually think the burn could be fun. I was looking at Torel at one moment in time, because he is, I think, the closest you can get to a burn commander where it's actually working.
Yeah.
But the commanders just very few and far between regarding to supporting an aggro strategy. I think the closest we have right now is probably Edgar Markov still, and he was printed a long time ago.
Yeah, true.
Anyway, that's it for today's discussion on archetypes in bracket 4. If you got your own thoughts, experience, or spicy takes on the meta, we'd love to hear them. Write it in the comments, join the conversation. And you can also join our new Discord server that you'll also find in the episode description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching.